The land was already alive with history long before the first sails appeared on the horizon. For thousands of years, Native American nations had lived across the continent, cultivating corn, hunting deer, building villages, and passing down traditions through story and song. When the first Europeans stepped ashore, they believed they had entered a new world, but to the peoples who had always lived there, it was the only world they had ever known. And in that moment of encounter, when strangers faced one another across an ocean of difference, the destiny of two continents was forever changed. Don't forget to like the video. Our American History series continues, and the story begins now. The earliest recorded meetings took place in the Caribbean. When Christopher Columbus arrived in 1492, he encountered the Taino people of the islands. At first, they greeted him with gifts of food and kindness, curious about these strangers with shining armor and large ships. But Columbus quickly saw them not as equals, but as subjects, potential laborers for Spain. Within decades, the Taino population was devastated by disease, enslavement, and violence. That first encounter set a pattern that would echo across the hemisphere. A mix of curiosity, hospitality, exploitation, and tragedy. Further south, Hernán Cortés landed in Mexico in 1519 and came face to face with the mighty Aztec Empire. Moctezuma welcomed him cautiously, offering gifts, unsure if Cortés was a god or a threat. Within 2 years, the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan lay in ruins, conquered by Spanish steel, horses, and smallpox. Francisco Pizarro repeated the story in Peru, toppling the Inca Empire. For the native peoples of Central and South America, encounters with Europeans meant the collapse of entire civilizations. In North America, the story unfolded differently. There were no vast empires like the Aztec or Inca, but powerful confederacies and nations filled the land. The Iroquois in the Northeast, the Powhatan in Virginia, the Wampanoag in New England, the Cherokee in the South, each had their own ways of life. When English settlers began arriving in the early 1600s, they depended on these nations more than they realized. At Jamestown in 1607, the colonists settled in the territory of the Powhatan Confederacy. At first, relations were tense but manageable. Powhatan, the chief, sought to incorporate the English into his network of alliances, trading corn for metal tools. But misunderstandings grew. The English believed in owning land permanently, while the Powhatan viewed land as shared, used seasonally by different groups. These conflicting worldviews led to suspicion and violence. By 1622, a brutal war erupted when the Powhatan launched a surprise attack, killing hundreds of colonists. Retaliation followed, and decades of warfare left the relationship shattered. Farther north, the Pilgrims at Plymouth faced a different story. After their first deadly winter in 1620, they encountered the Wampanoag people. Massasoit, their leader, saw in the weakened English potential allies against rival tribes. Through Squanto, a Patuxet man who had been kidnapped, taken to Europe, and returned with knowledge of English, communication became possible. Squanto taught the Pilgrims how to plant corn, where to fish, and how to survive in this new land. The alliance culminated in the famous Harvest Feast of 1621, remembered as the first Thanksgiving. For a time, cooperation prevailed, but even this relationship would eventually strain under the pressure of expanding English settlements. Throughout the 1600s, more colonies appeared and more encounters took place. In New England, conflict flared during the Pequot War of 1636 to 1638, when English settlers and their native allies clashed with the Pequot tribe. The war ended in massacre, with entire villages destroyed. Later, in 1675, King Philip's War erupted. Metacom, known to the English as King Philip and son of Massasoit, led a desperate uprising against the colonists. For 2 years, New England burned. Towns were destroyed, thousands on both sides died. When the war ended, native resistance in southern New England was broken, and English expansion accelerated. These encounters were not just battles. They were collisions of worldviews. For Native Americans, land was not something to be owned outright, but a sacred trust to be used and shared. For Europeans, land was property bought, sold, and divided with fences. To natives, nature was alive with spirit. To settlers, it was a resource to be tamed. Even religion marked a vast gulf. Missionaries tried to convert tribes to Christianity, sometimes with success, often with resentment. To many settlers, native traditions were seen as pagan, while to natives, European ways seemed harsh and alien. And yet, not all was hostility. Trade flourished in many regions: furs for muskets, beads for cloth, corn for iron tools. Friendships were formed, and cultural exchange occurred. Some natives learned English. Some colonists adopted native practices of hunting, farming, and diplomacy. But the balance of power shifted steadily toward the Europeans, whose numbers grew, whose weapons dominated, and whose diseases ravaged native populations. By the early 1700s, the story of first encounters had largely ended. The initial shock of meeting had given way to an era of colonization, where natives were increasingly displaced and Europeans entrenched. But those first encounters, moments of wonder, generosity, fear, and violence, shaped the path of America's history. They were the beginning of a long and complex relationship, one marked by both cooperation and conquest. The legacy of those encounters still lingers. Place names, crops, and words remind us of what was shared. At the same time, the scars of loss, land taken, and cultures suppressed remind us of what was destroyed. The first encounters with Native Americans tell a story not of a single moment, but of a crossroads where two worlds met and neither would ever be the same again. This was episode 5 of our American History series. In the next episode, we'll cover the Salem witch trials. Subscribe for more history stories. Thank you for watching. History is not just about the past. It is a story we still carry. If you want to continue this journey, don't stop here. Watch the next episode. Subscribe to the series, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next chapter.